This is The Naked Life with Roxanne Noor. So today I'm here with Sabrina Vasquez.
Hello.
So I actually loved the way we met, which was in a cacao cafe. And I saw you, and you were painting really beautiful pictures, and you kind of just showed me your portfolio.
Yes. Okay.
You remember? It was really nice.
Yeah.
And you do something really interesting on the island that I haven't met anyone else who does this, but you do Yoni Portraits.
That's correct.
Yeah, and Yoni is the Sanskrit word for vagina, for like the people who don't know. And a lot of your art that I've seen is really based on eros and sensuality and reverence for the body. And so in today's conversation, I wanted to see where we can find the overlap between the creative process and sensuality and sexuality, and then actually go into your creative process as a visual artist and what you feel that really gives you inspiration, touches you, and allows you to create all the ideas that live in your head and bring them into fruition. I feel like all of us have such an innate creative ability within, but actually going out and doing it and then sharing it is quite difficult sometimes. And I feel like you do this in a really beautiful, open way.
Thank you.
Yeah, and one of my best friends has been doing the Yoni Portraits with you, so she's one of your clients, and she told me, like, I really think Sabrina is a witch because because we did these portraits together and everything in my life is changing. She said it helped her unlock something. She was basically celibate for like months. And then she started to tap more into eros and like a more heart-centered approach to sexuality with men that she hasn't experienced in a super long time. So let's break it down and start first with, how did the Yoni Portraits come into your field, and what is like the process of creating them?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So when I started drawing to begin with, it was a way for me to cope with anxiety. So I had a point in my life where I didn't even know what anxiety was really. Like, I just knew that I was having a lot of tension kind of residing within my chest area. And it continued to a point where I wasn't sleeping, so it kind of invoked insomnia. And I felt that the drawing, which I used to do as a kid, but I totally stopped during like high school and university because I studied science and things like this. But I kind of naturally gravitated back towards it. And I felt that the more detail that I had in my artwork, the more I could shift out of like my headspace and just fall like kind of more with ease in my body, and I was able to fall asleep. And so this is kind of how the art just started in general. And when I was drawing at the beginning, I used to use like, I'm very visual, like if I see something I can draw it, so I'd have these kind of like images or visions, if you call them, and I wanted to kind of express it in my art, and I didn't know how to without seeing an image. So I used to look for stock images of like women or men, and I would kind of overlap them until I got close to what it was that I saw. So I kept doing that, and then there was a point where I had a vision. I was like, okay, so like did my usual thing, and I was like, all right, let me just layer them. And I couldn't really find exactly what I was looking for, so then I started taking nude photos of myself. And then for somebody who used to struggle a bit with like body dysmorphia when I was younger and stuff, I thought it would be an interesting experience or challenge to kind of see myself differently in this way. So I started doing that, and it was, I don't know, it was quite beautiful. It was kind of like writing like a love letter to myself, but metaphorically speaking. And from that point, I think I had a curiosity for my yoni as well. So then I did the same for my yoni. I took a nude photo or like a photo of my yoni, which was actually very difficult at the beginning because I just never really like took my camera phone and was like, oh wait, how do I angle this? And what about the lighting? So I was playing around with it, and I found a perfect photo, which I actually really enjoy, and in the past I've sent it to lovers.
A good one.
Yes, it's one that I very much like a lot. But I used this one, and then I started drawing off of this image, and a friend of mine, a very close friend of mine, saw it, and at the time I was also studying Tantra, more classical Tantra, and we were kind of on the subject around the yoni and things like this, and the same friend is also part of the same teachings and stuff as myself, and she was interested in what I was doing, and she wanted to actually buy the piece from me. But what she didn't know was that the piece that I was working on, it was a much larger piece, and it was kind of a storytelling thing. So I started with the yoni. So the yoni was kind of at the top here, and then I started to add different pieces around it. So it was like a work in progress, and one to which I didn't feel like it wanted to be sold or given away at this point. But I had offered to paint hers. Like, I was like, maybe I can just paint your yoni instead. And because she's a good friend of mine, she's like, yeah, of course, let's do this. Let's try this out. And from there, that's kind of how it started. And then other women in the same group of us, or like within this little community that we had, more and more of them started to reach out to me. And I did it kind of based on donation because I was experimenting. And gradually, I just started to do more of them, and it just became a thing. So it wasn't at all like, I woke up one day and said, I'm going to do Yoni portraits. It quite naturally came to fruition, and I feel my art has always been this way. There's no way of like forcing or like this kind of push attitude. I feel like it's very
like an unfolding.
That's right. It's very intuitive, and I feel it's guided in a lot of ways, and so it guided me here. Yeah.
When we use this word guidance in the art, what do you feel is guiding you? Or when you're in these states of just highest inspiration and you feel like it's just happening to you, can you describe that process? Would you describe it as a sort of channeling or an allowing, or even how you said, from what I've seen with your paintings that are beautiful, is the multi-layered dimensions. So it's the yoni, but then from some of the ones I've seen, there's like a lot of naturalism actually. Mm-hmm. There's like elemental forces, there's flowers, there's different components of nature. Mm-hmm. So how do these things come to you? And how do you, what is the process in allowing?
Always when first, before I draw, I like to do kind of a consecration. So for me, this is kind of offering the fruits of my labor, like the act of what I'm doing, to whatever higher source. And often for me, it's God. But I say like a non-dogmatic God like this. It's not meant to be religious or anything. It could be really anything. But you call it the source, you call it the absolute, whatever you want, creation. For me, for some reason, it's just always God. So I feel like I connect with this, and sometimes I like to imagine it like it's sweet honey that's like kind of coming from this point above, and it's just kind of like being poured over me and like hugging every aspect of my body and my being and into my heart somehow. And it just kind of flows. Like, I don't know, there's some part of me that's very receptive to this, or it's just there. It's like as if like some opening of me just never really closed. It was always kind of remained open, and it's a matter of just attuning myself to it, And this is what I feel like creativity is. Like creativity, I think, is basically this connection with source. It's really just aligning yourself to this. The same way as we talk about love, like attuning yourself, aligning yourself to love. And I feel that creativity, and I always say that I'm not in control of my creativity, but I'm in partnership with it. And for me, it's more that I'm holding space for it. I am a space holder, and it's moving through me. And somehow, together, we are creating like this. And I think everyone has this capacity as well. It's just a matter of, like, again, making yourself receptive to it. But then also it can be expressed in so many different ways as well, like music and writing and, like, all these different things. But for me, this is what it feels like. And yeah, the multi-layered, like this, in the Yoni portraits themselves, like I usually take the women through a whole kind of journey or exploration. So one of the first things I tell them is that it's not your typical commission piece where you come to me and you tell me like, I want this, this, and this, and this, and then I do that, okay? Like, I feel that because it's such an intuitively guided process for me, when people come for like a very specific thing, already they're boxing me in, and they're putting boundaries around that creativity. So I always kind of use the analogy, or like the idea, that it's like building a swimming pool in the ocean. For me, this doesn't make sense. For me, this doesn't feel good. And I think that if they are to trust the whole experience, they'll see as well, like, what I'm talking about. Because it's also a journey of trust. It's trusting not only me, but trusting the creative process. And I have to do the same as well. So it's like we're all kind of co-creating in this way, like from the beginning. So the women come to me, and it starts as a conversation, just kind of why. Like, why do you want to connect with your yoni? What is it that you aspire to feel, to achieve, to learn, like any of these things? And through that, I guide them to kind of crystallize or solidify their intention. And then we do a bit of a meditation and things like this. And the intention is the most important part, because for me, I use that as the foundation for the artwork itself. So in terms of, if there's any knowing, let's say, it comes from just kind of reconnecting with their intention. So oftentimes I'll record them saying it, and so I can listen back to it. It's almost like receiving a mantra or like an affirmation or something like this, and it already has a certain kind of resonance to it that I allow to kind of enter that creative process, and then that becomes the art. So the layers and the different elements, it really comes from them. But also, I think my understanding of like God, or like the creator or source, or any of these things, beauty, like it's something that can be easily like felt and seen through art, through love or intimacy, but also through nature. I feel like just sitting there contemplating like a flower, contemplating like the little birds, the ants, like all of these things, it's so simple and it's so pure in this way. And so I think that's why a lot of these elements get integrated into the artwork as well, because for me anyway, I feel that there's no difference between nature and the yoni like this. There is very much this like obvious kind of overlap, or like merging of the two like this. And I did actually write a short essay like for fun years ago about this, but just kind of showing the relationship between symbolism in nature. So like if you look at sacred geometry, and like the flower of life, there's like little like yoni kind of symbols more or less that's in it. And I'm like, well, no wonder, like it totally makes sense. You see photos all the time of like flowers or rose petals or papaya and things like this that look like the yoni. So I'm like, it's so obvious, you know? And so this is why I think these elements somehow play into the portraits as well.
Mm-hmm. And before, you brought up that much of your approach is intuitive.
That's correct.
Yeah. How would you define intuition? And how would you say so I have a lot of friends who are like classically trained visual artists, and they say one of the things that actually hurt them the most was going to art school for so many years and losing that intuitive touch. So it's all about form, structure, very, very linear approach to art. And this intuitive sensing, how would you define intuition, and how do you think people can access it in creation?
Ooh, that's a difficult question, but I appreciate it.
So intuition itself, when you think about it.
That's right. Intuition, for me, it's just a deep feeling. It's like a knowing somehow. It's like very like deep within somehow, like the heart of hearts. And sometimes actually I can feel it in like almost the base of my yoni, like, because I feel like for me it's like it gets to this point where I can feel the heartbeat within my yoni itself. It's like from this space I think the intuition comes from, like this. And I don't know, it's very subtle. It's almost like a whisper. And how can you access it? I think it's a matter of just really like centering, and like for everyone it's going to be different, but it's like you can call it maybe your inner voice, or like your inner world, or I don't know what, maybe the void, or your heart of hearts, something like this. But I think this is where it comes from. But I've always been a very intuitive person. Like, I think that I've always made choices more from intuition versus like
Logic.
exactly. This always been the case for me. And so I don't really think about like where it comes from too much, but I just know when I feel it. It's just like a strong knowing. It's almost like how okay, so I also teach English here and there, and I love it. But I remember when I first started teaching English, like learning grammar was a very awkward thing for me, because I'm like, wait, but like, how do I not know this? I'm a native English speaker, so I never have to think about it because it's so automatic, it's so habitual in this way. So I feel it's almost similar to the intuition. It's like a language that I just know, and so for me to like explain, to be like how to connect, it's a very difficult thing because it's already there. But I would say that if anything, just feel into yourself, feel into your body, feel into like just listening and seeing if there's a voice. You know, first start from this place. Is there a voice that's coming up, or where is it coming from? What does it feel like? And how connected is it to your heart versus your mind, like this? And I think if it's too much up here, then that's probably like a good sign that it's your mind, let's say. But if it's coming from somewhere else, then I think it's fair to say that it's more intuition, like this.
I would completely agree with that. And also I resonate with what you said about it being a whisper rather than like the mind is kind of like a screaming machine. It's so, you can really hear everything. But the intuition is to me like a visceral bodily feeling. And you spoke before of being fine-tuned, and I think that's also an important thing, is our capacity to feel into the subtle bodies.
Yeah.
And this is also why what you do with the Yoni portraits is important, is there's such a disconnect that we feel between the body and the mind complex. And it almost seems like sometimes completely two separate beings.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and intuition for me, when I felt it, especially in the creative process, it's exactly what you said. It's like a knowing beyond words. Yeah, so it's not coming in thought patterns and the way the mind has desire or fear. It's really beyond that. And to me, it's almost like a kind of neutrality. I don't really, really want it. It's just like, it's just happening.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. When you think about the creative process in general, I feel like one of the things that comes up a lot, even for me, I've been writing for years now, is the fact that sometimes there's just blocks. I think it doesn't matter like what type of art form, there's sometimes like a stagnant energy.
Yeah.
And this can be really discomforting for many people. How do you feel you work with blocks? What are some of your methods in reconnecting to this vitality, this, intuition, this? Is it something that you feel like you press against and you're like, oh, I need to do something about it? Or do you just wait? Like, what is your process in dealing with blocks?
First, I will say that, because we were just speaking about like the mind versus intuition, usually the blocks come when the mind is super present in the process. And the first thing that I'll do is I kind of step back from what I'm doing. I never try to force it, especially with the Yoni portraits, because it's unique in the way that I have to integrate like the woman who I'm working with and her energy and her intention. This is kind of being integrated into the artwork. The second that my mind starts to come through with all kinds of other different thought patterns, emotions, whatever, like the chaos, the monkey mind, this sort of thing, it also creates a disconnect from that intention. And it's like suddenly like I'm just kind of I'm spilling over into the artwork itself, and I don't want this. I'm very selective with the kind of energy and like feeling that I have and I experience when I'm doing these portraits. But also the same for a lot of my art too, like anything that I do. Sometimes when I'm doing personal things, I can kind of allow the mind to kind of, how to say, like slip in a little bit. And I'm like, okay, you know, this is what's happening with me. All right, I'll express that through my art. But oftentimes, no. And I think actually the 2 times I've ever had like any kind of mistakes, let's say, is when I was overthinking an art piece. And for me, I hand draw or hand make everything. So it's not digital art either. So I can't just like undo. It's like the second I put pen to paper, the second I put like paint to paper, whatever, it cannot be undone. So rarely actually do I ever make mistakes, especially when I'm connected and like I'm in that flow. It always works out somehow. I don't know. This is like the single thing that like I feel like it just happens quite naturally, and mainly because I trust it. I have to trust it. And once the mind comes through, then it's like it just kind of creates that block. So now I know to step away. But also when you're saying like these blocks or this stagnation, that too is part of the process as well. And I think there's like you need, for me anyway, I need to trust that. I need to kind of allow it to happen. And sometimes for me it happens when I'm having a lot of like inner turbulence. So I feel like with art, oftentimes, yes, we can channel our emotions and put it into like our creations, whether it's writing, painting, music. A lot, you hear this a lot, like heartbreak, sadness, all these things. I do this as well, but I feel like I have a certain threshold where it's like, here's a good amount of emotion, and then if I surpass that, it's too much. So I remember a few years ago, my dad died, and that was too much for me. Like that like overloaded my system, my like everything. I couldn't do anything. I was always crying. I was very hysterical. It was a lot of grief, and I had to pay more attention to the grief itself and be with that, as opposed to like trying to figure out like, oh, how can I make this into a creative kind of piece or whatever. It's a very kind of delicate process, I feel, that just you need patience. You need to trust. You need to just allow and let it be. And if ever I get to this point of like feeling stagnant, nature helps. And sometimes that also helps me kind of reset a little bit, or like reconnect anyway to like that creativity and that what you were calling like that vitality or that life force of like being able to express things artistically. But yeah, so this is kind of what I do, and this is how I think of it. It's not a bad thing. It's a productive thing in a sense, I feel, to have that kind of block and just to be with yourself a bit. It's inviting in that way, and I think it's helpful. And then when I come back to the art, it's like, oh, okay, like, all right, let's do this all over again, but new and different. And you know, maybe I can integrate some of that personal like experience into it, because I have the space now, I have the capacity to do it, but I cannot force it. And sometimes I go months without like doing anything, any kind of art. But that's okay. And it took me a while to get to this point, mind you. Like I was a little bit frustrated at the beginning because I was like, what's happening? But now I'm like, no, it's okay. It's fine. Yeah.
It's really interesting because I feel like there's this narrative in the arts of like the suffering artist, and like, oh, you're just so depressed and suffering so bad, and channeling it into the art. And there's a half truth to that, because I feel in very deep states of suffering, and actually being with the grief as the most important thing to move on and to rise above it is the part of actually giving yourself space and not needing to do. And so when I've faced the most enormous amounts of grief, it's almost completely crippling to the fact that I can't do anything, and I need to grieve. I can't be like, oh, I'm going to romanticize this and make it into a poem. It's like, no, I actually need to just sit with my grief. But there's a different process with when life is giving me initiations that are difficult, and I will use my writing as a way to metabolize and digest and process life experiences. But when there's something ultra huge, like when it's just slamming you to the floor, your father dies. Something like this, I feel like there needs to be room to not do and to just be with the feeling of pain. And what I've noticed is the artwork will come after my grieving process. It's never fully done, but when I've really grieved, then it's like, it reminds me of like winter to spring. Like everything's kind of frozen over, nothing's happening, the stillness of snow. And then it begins to melt a little. And then the flowers start to bloom. And yeah, it's kind of like this process of not pushing. And I think a lot of the creative block is a way for us to allow ourselves to stop. And for me, when I feel it, I will step away for days at a time. So I won't look at a piece, and I'll know when to not push anymore. Because that's another interesting question I want to talk to you about, is actually, I feel like there's points in time where I'm riding my scooter or I'm just taking a walk and a poem comes to me and I grab it. It's almost like coming through the ether, coming through the wind. And I just like, I need to get it down. Like, and this is such a beautiful feeling. But then there's the other points in time when I need to sit at the desk and just sit there for 3 hours and allow nothing to happen until something does. And so it's like a dance between catching it when it seizes you, it's not you, it's coming to you and you catch it, versus like waiting, and then it slowly makes its way with you and being there for both. So what would you describe as, what do you see as the difference between allowing inspiration to take you versus actually working and being there for inspiration?
It's an interesting question, but I feel it's kind of similar to what you were describing, though. Like for me as well. Like sometimes there's like a vision or a feeling, and I'm like, oh my goodness, okay, and I get super enthusiastic, and I'm like, let me start this and start that, and okay, I'm gonna build this and I'm gonna do that, and then sometimes it's a matter of waiting. But I also feel like, I don't know if it's so much. I wouldn't call it as waiting, though, somehow. Like, I feel like it's like when you were speaking, this kind of thing that I say sometimes, like the art of doing nothing, like that too is part of the experience. That too is part of the process as well. So it's like everything happens exactly as it needs to happen somehow. And it's just being able to kind of just be with that. So if something comes at me, okay, that's great. Wow. Beautiful gift, yeah. But if it doesn't come to me right away and I have to kind of just like putter around and we'll see what happens like this, then that's okay as well. And I just feel like I don't know, I just kind of allow that to happen. And I don't know, it's like inspiration is just it has its own rhythm, and it's just allowing it to kind of move and dance in its own way, and just to be there when it needs you, and just, or when it doesn't, like it's just being. I don't know what else to say about that, but that's kind of how I feel anyway. I don't know if that accurately answers your question.
Yeah, I feel like inspiration is also a sense of wakefulness. For me, when I feel the most inspiration, it's because I'm in like a very visceral dialogue with life, where I'm like pretty acutely watching things around me. I'm not in a state of apathy. I feel like a lot of my younger life, I was very frustrated with myself because there was so much, there were gifts inside of me and innate creativity that I wasn't knowing how to utilize. And it was from this state of apathy. It was from being in life, but kind of feeling like life is happening to me rather than with me or through me. And what I've seen with inspiration the most is when I am more involved in life. And it's not from like doing a lot of things, but it's from being very awake to the present moment, it's so much easier for inspiration to seize me. And Osho has this really great quote too that kind of goes into this. He says, energy is given to those that use it. And I see inspiration actually as this energy of, when it's happening, I don't let it just go past me. Like I really utilize it and work with it. And it doesn't happen in these lower states of apathy or kind of like a sleepwalking nature to life. And I think a lot of the time we get into automatic processes, which the brain really likes because it doesn't have to work so hard. But when I can be very conscious of the world around me, then I feel like inspiration just occurs so much more. And it kind of goes into one of my friends who's your client, what she was saying about the Yoni Portraits was being in the process of meditation with you was very important for her. Yeah, how would you speak to meditation and the creative act? How has meditation helped you in your life?
Oh, wow, okay. In terms of being awake or like aware of life itself, I feel like meditation does exactly that. It's kind of it realigns me to like whatever greater intelligence or like source or any of these things. Meditation helps me kind of return back into my heart space and just to be more connected with life, and to see it not just that like life is moving through me and life is around me, but I am life as well. It's like life is supporting life, and it's this continuous motion or sequence of events that in every way it's quite beautiful, really. And I think that that's what meditation kind of allows me to feel and to see. It's like the beauty in all of it. And I think it's also really important when I do it with the Yoni Portraits as well, because it allows women to also, again, connect with themselves, connect with the beauty, even the pain or the beauty in the pain, like this, to feel the subtle kind of energies, whether they're high or low, like they're all very relevant, they're all just as important as the other type of thing. And so meditation has been really helpful in this way. It brings you back to center, is how I feel. There's so many times I feel like there's so many different kinds of meditations, mind you, but there's so many moments in my life where it really, really allowed me to like just to feel again, to be super grounded, to be super present, and also just like connecting, like higher than myself, I think oftentimes, especially in the community, kind of like on the island, I feel, and I'm guilty of it myself too. I feel like a lot of us, we like to be in two different places. It's either like we like to be in the super mental level, like just kind of beyond form and like in this astral plane of whatever, and like really connecting with all kinds of beautiful celestial beings, spirits, fairies, whatever you want to call them. Or we like to be just like very much like in the world and like doing all the things, these very habitual behaviors, whatever, like how you were saying, the mind kind of automatically has this way of moving in life. And I think it's a matter of finding that balance and having the two kind of connect within the heart space itself. And so meditation really does that for me. It kind of like pulls everything together again. And then I can really move from this place, because I feel like the heart space and like love and all of these, it's very, like everything is so much rooted here. This is the center for me and for everyone, I'm sure, but like this is what I feel. And so I love when I'm meditating and just emotions start to flow through me, and energy is just like, whether I'm crying, I'm laughing, I don't know what, but it feels like this movement, this purging of something, and just allowing it to kind of like have space and just move. And it's cleansing or purifying in this way. And so this is why I think it's really important to also integrate this within the portraits themselves, because then it can offer that to the women, and so they can be even more connected to the yoni. And as I was saying before, it's the meditation that I often guide them through is connecting the heart to the yoni itself, because simultaneously they work together. They're not separate from each other. And I think in the cultures that we are in or a part of, it is kind of separate. There's this degree of separation, and I want to remove that, you know. It's like this kind of unity between the two. And then the yoni really speaks. Then it's like opening a dialogue. Then it's really hearing her, really knowing like, okay, what's going on? What do you need? What do you feel? What do you want? So it's very important this way.
And going back to what you said about there seems like a division almost between being in the ether and being really in non-dualism or oneness or higher states of consciousness versus the humanity or the primal aspect. I think it's the same thing for what you were talking about in the dialogue between the yoni and the heart, because to live in the heart for most people is essentially very dangerous because it's so much about feeling in a culture that's so adamant on numbing.
Yeah.
And we see the way that we are all kind of numbed even sexually as well, where sexuality is either like the hypersexual and just solely primal, and it's kind of like that. We both grew up in the States, and I remember being in college in this kind of like fuckboy culture of like, oh, it's fine, I just fuck him, he's a fuckboy, and not this sense of because I don't think sex needs to be just holiness, but in the dialogue between the heart and the yoni can open up so much more in the state of love and surrender. And love doesn't have to be with just one partner or this person you marry, but not seeing them as separate. And I think a lot of the time, in order to protect, we've created defenses around both of them. And it prohibits us from actually feeling the immense beauty and pleasure of what it means to make love, and even make love to yourself and self-pleasuring, how there's like so much shame and so much constriction. And even the fact of Yoni portraits of a girl taking a picture of her own yoni, like really looking at the shape of it. This is so rare. Yeah. And you study Tantra, and I work in Tantric temples. And so how do you see sex and creativity? What is the interplay for you?
So if I feel creativity is really like the source, like this, and because that's how I feel, it's like an energy, it's like something that it's moving through us, similar to love. Like I don't really see them as very different or separate from each other. But if I see creativity in this way, I feel like intimacy, physical intimacy, is kind of, it's like invoking that even more. It's like allowing that to really play through two people, not just one at a time, and just sharing that creativity, sharing that energy, sharing that love between the two people. Like I think I don't know, there's many different tantric teachings these days, so I can't keep up with all of them. But my understanding anyway is that when we speak about like bodily fluids and things like this, it's always perceived as like the creative potential. This is like the life force. This is what it is art in a way, you know? And so I feel like this is kind of where they overlap, and it just, like sex in itself, it's like it's almost like a playground to experience that creativity, to express it in so many different ways, but in a very beautiful way, in a very loving way, very like, it's like sweet, it's super sweet, like honey, you know, like that's how I feel. And I think it's so beautiful, and that's why I also really love that I am doing these Yoni portraits, because I can see that. I can see it and I can feel it with other women, just like how they're connecting with their sexual energy, and then how it's being expressed through creativity. Like that is the overlap right there. And it's like it's in such a tangible way as well, because when we're speaking about physical intimacy, it's a feeling, it's like an experience, but I love that I can share it in like a more tangible, like more like like an actual way, like a physical way like this, and just be like, look, this is what happened, this is what I did, you know. And so I feel like I'm constantly kind of doing this whole overlap and like just feeling both of them in so many different ways. And it's really beautiful. And I think that when we understand more of that creative potential, that creative energy that is moving through us, especially in the yoni, then I think that allows us, or that kind of invites us to explore more within the space of the yoni. And I understand people hold a lot of pain and shame and all these things too, and all of it is totally valid. But I think the creativity and you know, just the life force in the yoni kind of guides us through that, so we can be more receptive, be more open, and just be more attuned. I think in general it's okay if the yoni has, or your heart, the yoni and the heart, if there are certain barriers that, you know, go up at times, but it's a matter of like actually being aware of them. And how can you be aware of them if you're not even paying attention to your yoni, if you're not even like feeling into this space? And so I think that's super important, because the yoni, in the end of the day, it becomes like our inner compass. As women, it's like it is an endowment that we all have, that we all are gifted, you know, like this. And it does really guide us. And I feel like there's so many instances where, you know, I was physically intimate with somebody, and then after I would kind of feel into my yoni, and like if there was any kind of level of discomfort, you know, I felt like, okay, something is not okay, like I need to look at that and just contemplate it. What is she trying to tell me? And that's just it. It's having a dialogue with the yoni always. So that's what I love about the art, because I feel like it really opens that possibility for women, in a very gentle way too. It's not like, because I know there's so many different workshops and stuff where like it's more physical, like a physical kind of understanding of the yoni. And some people, this is like, that's too much, you know, especially if they're holding a lot of pain. And I like the art because it's such a delicate, like soft, gentle, like there's a purity to it, I feel. And I love that I can offer that to women and show them that there's different ways that you can connect with your yoni as well. That doesn't have to be through like physical touch per se. And I love when they take the photos as well, because I always tell them to like take more than one photo, because it kind of invites that yoni gazing quite naturally. And I feel that when you take photos, depending on the cycle that you're in as well, there's a totally different resonance. And it's kind of an invitation for women to explore that themselves too, in a very gentle way. And I don't like to always be the one to, like, I don't want to be like an instructor, like telling you like, okay, this, and this. I want to keep it like open for them to discover, for them to have their own, like for them to empower themselves in the experience itself. You know what I mean? Like they too are their own guides. And I think we forget this. So I leave space for that somehow. And I like that the photos kind of, you know, allow this. And it's also quite beautiful when some of them get their lovers involved too, and then they take photos of their yoni. And I've gotten photos where they decorated their yoni in such beautiful ways, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And I'm like, who knew? Like, you know, like that's a possibility. You can do this too. So I love that. I love that even just the creativity is already happening in that process quite naturally. So yes, I really don't see sex or sexual play or energy or any of these things in creativity, like at this point they're not separate. They cannot be separate. It's very much like well integrated, like together in this way. That's just the natural way, I feel.
And tying it into this aspect of Tantra, a lot of Tantra is working with sexual energy. And when we talk about like ejaculation, for example, being like a loss of chi, of vital energy, and knowing how to work with that, I feel like there's such a beauty to physical intimacy as a conduit of more creativity. But I also feel like there's a beautiful aspect of also withholding. And this is what I felt in myself in times where I felt called into brahmacharya or celibacy, where my longest period was 7 months at a time, and it involved no touch at all. So I wasn't even hugging people, which is like, you know, the way I am. I see someone and I'm like, men sitting on their lap. And so this was like the opposite of my default method of life, which is like very much about physical touch. And so taking that away, the hugging, the kissing, the sex, taking all of that away for 7 months, and very directly going into withholding, so I wasn't masturbating as well. And what came out of that was such a deep period of, you talked about purification, and for me, what purity means is actually a return back to truth, and feeling like in so many of the ways that I've related to sexuality in the past has been through such an indoctrination of what it means to be a sexual woman. I think when I was younger, because of things like slut shaming, there was a wanting to be rebellious and to reclaim sovereignty and pleasure. And I don't think that going into every desire is freedom. It's actually the opposite of freedom. And so I use this method of brahmacharya, celibacy, as this return back to my vital life force. And from that period was afterwards when I got more and more deeply into Tantra and really using the sexual energy as a component of speaking to the divine. And it's such a beautiful dance of using both methods, of using like the way in which we see what it means to purify, because a lot of the time it is actually connecting very deeply with the yoni through the act of actually not allowing other energies in. And a lot of the time it is this intimacy of allowing someone in, and exactly what you said, like speaking to her, what exactly is she saying afterwards. So much of intimacy isn't just in the moment, it's actually like, how does this make me feel afterwards? What are my energy levels afterwards? And I think for even a lot of men that are exploring Tantra is this feeling of like, oh, when I don't ejaculate, I have so much more life force. Oh, I have sensitivity in my fingertips. Oh, I can channel this from the sacral chakra up to my heart. So it's not just sitting in that one place. And there's so many aspects of the way we want to speak to our yonis. Yeah, whether it is doing the Yoni portraits and taking pictures of it, or it's brahmacharya, or a huge part for me is also dancing, like using the hips, using different parts of my body and channeling it upwards. And so, yeah, I feel exactly what you said, that the creative aspect of life and sexuality is one and the same. And there's so many ways of accessing this. What do you feel? So you said you studied science before, and at that time you weren't like super tapped into your art. How did your life change once you allowed yourself to really dedicate yourself to your creative potential?
Wow. Well, I mean, for start, like I said at the beginning, I was able to sleep because that was the issue for me. Like I wasn't sleeping, and so I just started kind of sketching. Actually, somebody told me write. They're like, write a journal, but I don't know. I couldn't find the words. Maybe I didn't want to find the words. I don't know. But I started sketching instead. I was like, I'm just gonna doodle, and that kind of initiated something more. And I feel like with the art, it's allowed me to express things that maybe at times I cannot articulate with words or like this. I can't write it out. So I love that I can share parts of myself in this way. And just, I don't know, the art has allowed me to really just trust and to kind of just be in that process and to, like, again, to understand creativity, understand like sexuality, sensuality, because everything I do is quite erotic or esoteric and all these different things. And I don't know, like just experiencing it through the art. Like even when I'm taking nude photos of myself and I have to draw myself, you know, I tell people even with life drawing and things like this, it's a whole different way of perceiving when you're the artist and you have to look at the person and you're trying to go kind of like figure out the outline of their body and things like this. Because when we're looking at people just like passing it, you know, it's a very superficial kind of way of looking at people. Oh, she looks good, he looks bad, whatever. But when, you know, you take the time to really perceive a person and all the different like curves, edges, shapes, and it is transfiguring them. And transfiguration is also a tantric practice where it is like seeing beyond form, seeing the divine in all things. So the art has kind of allowed me to see myself in a different way, but also the same to just people, like their forms, to really celebrate their forms, men or women. And then especially with the Yoni portraits, I think looking at or perceiving so many different yonis in this very transfigured way, and then hearing from the women and just seeing how things kind of like come together in the end, it's always so amazing and so beautiful. And I can't, sometimes it's like I'm surprised. I'm like, I cannot believe I did this, because a lot of the things that I do paint, oftentimes it's the first and the last time I will do it. That's why all the portraits are very different, because there's so many different kind of symbols that are being pulled into it. And I really like, I don't just practice something. I look at it and I'm like, okay, that's it. That's what I need. This is what's going to happen. And then I just start doing it. And I'm like, okay, and that happened. All right, great. Like there's so many like interesting and beautiful moments like this, but the art has really, it feels like it's a part of me, but it's not a part of me. Like I see the way that it's evolved too. Like from the day when I first started sketching stuff, I used like really just crap paper, like anything I could just find on like my shelf, and one pen. I had just one pen, and it was a simple pen. I was like, I don't know, I'm just doing something. And I remember the day I walked into the art shop and I saw all the different kinds of pens and like different papers and paints and all these things. Like this happened quite naturally, and it just kind of unfolded. And I just see that the art evolves with, like, it's a reflection of kind of my own evolution. Like we're evolving together, and I really love that. It feels like it's like I'm holding hands with myself, but in a different form like this. And we're just kind of walking along the path and just like, okay, yeah, cool, this is where we're at. And so I love that somehow I can check in with myself like through my art and like see that change being reflected back at me. It's a beautiful mirror. That's what it is. It's a beautiful mirror, probably the most beautiful mirror that I have in my life at the moment. And so I love this about the art very much. And it's opened so many different possibilities for me that I didn't see possible. And it continues to do this. So I'm very curious to where it's going next. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so much of art is definitely evolving as we are, and even looking at some of my favorite artists over time and seeing their art as like a insect in the amber. They're like capturing a moment of their consciousness at that period of time, and seeing the way it's changing as you're changing and metamorphosizing, and yeah, how it's like a very fluid process.
That's right.
Yeah. But the essence, I feel like any piece of art I see, whether it's Picasso or Monet, it's like you can sense just the essence throughout each picture is the same, actually. And so there is something about the individual soul that's being carried into it. And this is really beautiful, like the changes, but then also the solidity of, yeah, in a way, the person's soul that's being carried through. And I love what you said about like me holding my own hand through this process. This is also exactly what it is. So, yeah, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you for having me here and asking me all the questions. It's very nice, and I feel often I don't really. Somehow I don't make enough space to talk about my art, actually. And so it's nice that I can kind of add a little voice to it. Yeah, I mean, I often like people to kind of interpret it themselves and just kind of experience it themselves, but every now and then it's nice to kind of share how I feel and the things that I experience in that. So thank you. Thank you for giving me the space to share.
Mm. You're welcome.